You don't even need to put in a piece of metal, Dad. Just use this.
Use that?
Yeah. Welcome to episode 6 of the GT6 build. Last time we finished off a load of work under the car and got the body back on the chassis. In order to push onto the side of it, we'll actually see when it's done. We ended off episode 5 having cut out an enormous slot spanning the width of the windshield. When I say enormous, that's more of a relative thing, I guess. The car is deceivingly small, but it still would create quite the issue if we were to just leave it like this, so I suppose we should get on with fixing it up. You'll remember from last time that we carefully measured and cut the slot to be an even gap. With the material removed, however, the roof has sagged slightly, which will look terrible if it's permanently fixed like this. To pull it back to where it needs to be, it was simply shimmed from behind with some cardboard until there was a nice consistent panel gap from one side to the other. The whole area was tidied up and rust converted before applying some primer to help protect the metal from any more rust in the future. Using a paper template as a guide, a repair panel was carefully cut out of some shiny new metal and bent gently until it followed the shape perfectly. A flap disc made quick work of finessing the shape, and once happy, it was tacked into place. It's important to remember that if you are MIG welding a butt joint like this, you need to leave a small gap for the weld to properly penetrate and allow the surrounding material to expand. Otherwise, the weld will become a high spot that may not be very noticeable in raw state, but put some paint on it and bring it out into the hot sunshine, and a faint line will appear as the car warms up. TIG welding gives a weld that is the same hardness as the surrounding material, and thus will expand and contract consistently. Someday we'd love to get a TIG and learn how to do this the best way possible, but until then, our MIG welds are sure to do the trick so long as we take every precaution. The other side is practically a mirror image, and once installed, it's just a matter of slowly and carefully filling in all the gaps until there are no more. Another benefit of TIG welding is, if done well, a lot less post-cleanup is needed. In our case, we had to carefully grind down all the high spots without thinning out the surrounding material, before changing over to a flap disc to reveal a lovely smooth finish that should require very little filler to perfect before paint. There's no way to hammer and dolly this area due to internal structures, so after inspecting and lightly tapping down any obvious highs, we'll call it done. I must say we're really very pleased with how it turned out, so let's jump into the next task. We've been going through putting the bolts back in that hold the body to the chassis. There are also 2 on each side in this area where these new cross braces have to go in. And we weren't able to drill those holes out earlier on because of course the body wasn't on the chassis and we didn't know where they were going to end up. So now that the body is on the chassis and everything else is being bolted down nice and firmly, we're going to come from underneath there, and there's that little bracket on the actual frame, and we're going to drill up through the bottom through the captive nuts, and then we'll come back on the top and open up the holes a little bit wider. Whipping the boxes in for the first time was doable, but the fitment was far from ideal. Not only were some of the gaps horrendous, but it turned out the sleeves were not spot welded on a 90-degree angle, which made the bolts bind up when trying to thread them in by hand. As you can see, the bolt does protrude from the floor at a 90, so this must have just been a manufacturing defect. We decided to cut out the middle and weld in a short piece of tubing to remedy this issue, while also opening up the hole somewhat to give enough slop so the part can sit properly square in the car. While it pained me deeply, a few small spot welds were more than adequate for the task, and, weight savings, bro. With the floor prepared for welding, we could adjust the flanges for fitment and weld it in. No wimpy plug welds here, this ain't going anywhere. Although it probably just negated any potential weight savings we made a second ago. Rinse and repeat is normal, and we end up with this. It looks so much easier on camera. I do look forward to working on the engine someday, as at least there's only one of those in the car. With that completed, it's on to the next step again. This is the driver's side A-pillar. After cleaning off the old paint and body filler, we noticed a small amount of Canadian weight savings. Be warned, if you ever see this on your own car, there is really no such thing as a small amount of rust. The more you look, the more you find. Oh, goody. At least the area inside the windshield appears to have escaped the cutting wheel of death. A bit pitted, but still intact, and some wire wheeling and rust converter will kill the oxidization and make sure it doesn't get any worse. A new theme that will be continued throughout the rest of this build. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for lower down. I must warn you, if you're easily squeamish at the sight of rust, look away now and call our self-help hotline at 888 Help Me, I Have Rust. There's probably a better way to do this, but there's no denying this was way more fun. This rain gutter was simply spot welded to the rest of the A-pillar. It was supposed to catch driving rain from the windshield and direct it up to the roof, or catch falling rain while parked and direct it down to the ground. Unfortunately, what it actually does is take the rain and put it right smack between the two bits of metal and rot them out internally. We're just going to delete it, as we don't intend on using the car in the rain much, and we'll figure out a better sealing system for the doors and windows later on. You can tell that after removing all that rust, we next need to remove more rust. The metal got tidied up with a wire wheel and received a coat of rust converter. Dye rust goes on clear and then starts turning this kind of purple color after a little while. With the patch made, we've got a pretty good fitment, so let's weld it in. Doesn't look like I got it quite straight there. I'm sure I'll go back and fix it though before. Okay, maybe not. Pretend you didn't see that. You know what, after a cleanup, that's not that bad. We'll call it a win. So in this area here, there's two layers of metal. There's a layer in behind and a layer on the front. They were both rotten, so we had to cut them both out, and now we're rebuilding them. So this is the first one to go back in, and this is a little cardboard template that we've made here. And it looks a little funny, but it works. And that'll fit in there, something along those lines.
Sense of the curve, this area here in particular.
Yeah. We verified our bending points based off the old part. I almost called it metal. It wishes it was metal. After a bit of time with some pliers and assorted whacking tools, we could test fit it to the car. So we ended up ripping it back out, made a few more little fine tunes. We've got some etch prime on it now as well, because some of these areas are quite sort of captive and it'll be hard to get paint on it afterwards. So we've left some bare steel exposed to weld to, and this little puppy is just going to go up in there, something like that. Some time with the welder and a final go over with more etching primer, and it looks like this. To the attentive eye, it may appear a tad wide at the base, but the original panel too had a weird little jut out there, which is easier to see from the backside. With the first layer finished up, we could make a template for the second one. To form the flange this time, we decided to use a technique I've seen before, which involves a couple of wooden patterns. It was quite a shallow bend and hard to see, but the jig worked out really very well. Some slits were needed to allow for compound bend, and after tacking and confirming the fitment on the car, it was finish welded and ground down smooth with a Dremel for the hard-to-reach parts. Plug weld holes were drilled on the inner panel to give easier post access for the grinder, and with it clamped in place, the panel can be fitted for good. The excess was then removed, welds ground down, and once polished up, some more of that new fancy rust converter was applied. That pretty much sorts the driver's side, so it's on to the passenger. While this side appears to be in much better condition on the lower portion, it was clear after digging into it a bit that the upper area needed some help. Woo! Wasn't expecting that.
Did it snap a spot weld?
Yeah, there's hardly anything holding us on. Exactly the reason why we're taking it off.
It just seems like the ideal place to have water trapped in behind. Oh my goodness. You can see the whole thing flexing. Like there's just supposed to be spot welds all the way up there.
There's a spot weld down here and up here.
Jeez.
Nothing in between.
Oh my word, yeah.
You're
right.
not really looking at it. You can see a hole all the way through there. Woohoo!
More rust.
After all that fun, there was a bit of cleanup needed. That's our car. It would appear that Jeremy Clarkson set the gap between the spot welds here at British Leyland. Only an orangutan could manage this.
Somebody got carried away anyway.
Not exactly evenly spaced. What was left was only surface rust, which was promptly wire-wheeled and rust converted. More of the same was needed due to a leaky windshield that had made a mess of the dashboard area. The patch needed for this was definitely one of the easier ones we've had to make. A very nice change of pace, needless to say. The old spot welds were drilled out and conveniently used to plug weld the new panel in place. The outermost edge of the patch got completely welded up after tacking it carefully to prevent any distortion. With it cleaned back and rust-proofed, that takes care of a good chunk of work near the front of the body shell, so let's end this video right there. Stay tuned for next time when I make a big hole, Dad grinds some paint, and I forget basic math. For 40 what? There is a lot more to come though, so stay tuned, and thanks for watching. If you like what we're doing on this channel, please consider supporting us through Patreon and sharing this video. We'll see you next time.
You can fill it with bottle.
Oh, you're funny.